we had 14.
For now, I, yeah.
And there was 50 pound bags of beer quantity into these dog food. And what's happened now, all of that.
Yeah, we've seen in our house, we're just like,
And when you're on it, I just said, oh, could you come with the
it's 28, I don't know,
It
worse than 98.
What happened was, the
I
savings
think
rate.
620 was across the road.
Yeah, it was like awkward.
And there was
For now,
pause and it's there and it's like,
Yeah.
big change.
It
Of
wasn't anything.
course, you got everywhere pretty fast too.
Oh, yeah.
This saved my life. The boys had given me my little Christmas like this one.
So you're, yeah, but you can even see changes. Yeah, now, yeah, it was regular.
In Georgetown, my dad
183, it's just research boulevard, the roads went all the way across and then they cut them off.
Yes, fine, how are you? I like that song about
Get over something else.
Yes.
And now they're.
Oh, gosh. We need to-
Take one for yourself and your partner, pass it back. And Patty, they're gonna hang out with you. So anybody that comes in, they can stay with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
We've, yeah. Diane, thank you.
It's Diane coming.
Yeah.
I thought so. Here, how do you use the extra?
All right, let's get this party started. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yes, sorry that we had technical challenges and I just didn't have the leadership available to operate all of the tech last weekend. And so thank you for your patience, and we're gonna pick up, and I've got an adjusted schedule, so we're just gonna add a week on into going a week into November, so it'll be fine. Instead of finishing on November the 3rd, we'll finish on November the 10th.
So we'll have a post-election roundup.
Well, I mean, you know,
That would be good.
depending on if there is an election, depending on how,
It may not be.
it may not be results and, you know,
Oh, yeah.
it'll be an election, there'll be results, and it'll be a peaceful.
Will they have been published by the 10th? Let us know.
I know.
I'm going to say yes.
I'm hoping so.
I'm going to say yes, we will have a finality to the presidential election by November the 10th.
Good for me.
And I'm recording it, so take it to the bank.
Yeah.
How is Katie?
Who was? I'll tell you in just a second. All right, let's open in prayer. Can I get someone who would lead us in the opening prayer? Thank you, John.
Let's pray. Oh God, you have bound us in a common life. Help us confront one another without hatred and work together with respect. Remove arrogance and hatred, break down the walls that divide us, and unite us in love. Spread your spirit so all people may live under the banner of the Prince of Peace. Heal our divisions, take away prejudice, and unite us in truth, peace, and love. Bless our land with justice and peace, guide our leaders with wisdom, and protect our liberties. Help us fight oppression and maintain justice, all for your glory. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Normally online, one of our deacons, Kitty Kosachata, joins us, and Kitty took a fall earlier this week and broke her pinky, had to get stitches, and was concussed. And so she is watching live right now, but she is feeling a wee dizzy. And so prayers for her and her recovery. And but she had said yesterday that she's sore but feeling better, even though she's feeling dizzy this morning. So reminder to us as we're continuing on to remember to listen deeply, show curiosity, learn together, and encourage one another. We're not here to fix, but to be curious, suspend judgment, and to build and develop relationships. So focusing in on curiosity, let us introduce ourselves. And Joan, I'm going to lead off with you. We're going to go to the back row to Patty, up to John, over to Natalie, over to me. And so say your name and what's one word that captures the feeling you get You learned something new.
My name is Joan and aha.
Dang it, now you cannot say aha.
Hey. Lord.
Go ahead.
My name is Kathy and I would say inspired.
Keep going, keep going.
Okay, I'm Nancy Ryder. I was going to say, I did it.
But you cannot say aha. I have banned the word aha. You only get one word and she already took it.
Success.
Success. Woohoo. Good one. Patty.
I don't know. I'll get excited.
Ooh, there it is.
John Hoffner, wisdom.
Gloria Diaz callback, happy.
Missy Ngoma, fulfilling.
Really?
Natalie Day, joyful.
Joyful, joyful, we are for you. All right, back to you, Dan.
Diana Petrick, thrilled.
Josh, heyo. Heyo. That's my word. We're gonna have some fun today. I'm gonna lead off with a video. And if you remember, this is kind of a back and forth. So we'll watch the video, we'll debrief it a little bit, do some activities, back to another video. We're back and forth on these things, okay? So, got a long way to go and a short time to get there. All right, here we go. Let's see here. I'm going to share the screen, click on that one, share sound, sharing the screen, over here.
We've been talking about the effects of this big sword. So, David, why is humility so important for Christian politics?
So, if you want to talk about the things that are really dividing America right now, let's talk about the legacy of American slavery and fixing that. If you want to talk about abortion rights, or if you want to talk about how do you deal with Vladimir Putin, or how do you deal with China and Taiwan, these are complicated matters. They're incredibly complicated. Not one of us is an expert in any of them, much less all of them. And so humility is just a necessary recognition of the reality of complexity. So, you know, when I got back from Iraq and I was hip deep in this Iraqi civil war and the tangled web of Middle East violence, one of the fastest ways I knew that I was interacting with somebody who didn't know what they were talking about is when they would say, well, I know how to fix it, right?
Yeah.
Now, if they said, this is really difficult, here's my best idea, I'm listening to that. But this sort of authoritative declaration of you know exactly what to do, you're immediately broadcasting that you haven't really looked at it in all of its richness and complexity. And we're in a world right now where we're full of people who have absolute definite ideas about virtually every major issue under the sun. And it's just not recognizing reality. I think humility is the proper recognition of reality.
Russell, why do you think that's so hard for Christians in politics? What's going on that we, as Christians, we're having such a hard time walking humbly?
Well, it's difficult first because we're sinners.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I forgot about that.
Humility is something we're always going to be grappling with. But secondly, I think it's hard, particularly for Christians, because sometimes people feel as though humility is a lack of conviction. And so having certainty on everything is a sign of faithfulness or truth. And so that tends to cause people to become scared sometimes when they think, well, I don't know exactly how to fix.
Right, so they have to gin up the sense of conviction that's
so
not actually based in true knowledge.
Yes. And usually what happens is you kind of outsource your thinking to somebody or to some voices who say, it's easy. All you do is this. And that's a very alluring temptation for most of us.
And I get it. I totally get it. When a new and complicated thing arises and it's on a hot button issue, you crave certainty.
Yeah.
It's very human to want to do this. But one of the things that I urge people to do is anytime you hear a new idea or a new thought or a new concept, learn about the idea from the idea's proponents before you race to learn about it from its opponents. Look at yourself like you're a juror. A juror in a criminal case or a civil case hears from the prosecution and then hears from the defense and decides only after they've heard each side do their best to persuade. And even then, good jurors sometimes end their time on jury duty going, I did my best, but I wasn't positive. And that is okay to say as a Christian. I'm doing my best, but I'm not sure.
And I would take that just a little bit further to say, imagine yourself in the position of the person who holds that viewpoint, because every viewpoint makes sense to the people who hold it.
Well, I think that's so valuable, and that seems to be one way we can all walk humbly. Let's talk about hope.
Okay.
Why do we need to grow our hope if we're going to have a healthy Christian politics? Russell, why is hope so important?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to say what hope is.
Okay.
The Bible says you hope for what you do not see and you long for it. So you're trusting God to get you there. Hope's important in this arena because if you're hopeless, then you end up either just giving up or you end up saying, well, what does it matter, because it's all just going to fall apart anyway. There has to be some goal at the end of this that we have to move toward.
Let me pull back into the example of Jesus for a moment. Okay. You also have to ask, what are you hoping for? Okay, so Jesus, who was on the cross and had the power to get himself off the cross, right? He had the power to smite the people who were unjustly crucifying him. So what does he do in his dying moments before his, before his resurrection? He says, forgive them, they know not what they do. Well, some of the hope there is embodied in what is the state of their souls. It's removing it above and beyond the immediate circumstance. He didn't say that to them in the hope that they would say, we're crucifying the wrong guy. We're going to pull him off the cross, right? So we have to center our hope in the right thing. And that's really critical in these political discussions. What we often do is we end up centering our hope in a certain ideology prevailing.
That's right.
And so we have to right order our hope. What is our hope ordered towards? And our hope is very much rightly ordered to what is the condition of expressing hope for the salvation of other people, of the discipling of other people. And when you're talking about that as a hope, it really does begin to alter maybe some of your priorities when you're talking about ideological combat, or you're talking about political combat. And then the other thing is, if you're talking about the fate of Christianity, which is often discussed, well, where are you locating your hope for the fate of Christianity? Are you locating your hope in the sovereignty of God, or the sovereignty of a political party or a politician? So I know of quite a few people who hope and have a lot of hope, but often in the wrong thing.
I love that, because this is so much about this big shift that we're talking about, from the what of ideology, of party, of policy, to the how of spiritual values, of relationship, of spiritual practices. And this shift from our hope, not on an ideology prevailing, but actually our hope in Jesus and what he's doing in the kingdom at the level of the Spirit.
First, I'd like to take us back to where David just had us at the cross. If you think about these two different kinds of hope, you have two criminals on either side of Jesus. The one is saying, if you're the Christ, get us out of here.
That's right. The what? He's focused on the what. Yes.
Just end this. And the one who's redeemed says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. There's a sense of need for grace and a sense of something that's beyond just the immediate circumstance.
That's right.
And so that's often I want to have the first criminals kind of hope.
That's right.
But you know,
Right.
what we
A
immediately
what of an
get.
outcome that
Yeah.
we want, yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Well, here we have it. We need to grow all of our humility and our hope. So let's get going. We've talked about the shift to spiritual values, and we're going to focus especially on two spiritual values, that of humility and that of hope. Why are these so important? Well, it's because Jesus really made them very important as part of his big shift with his disciples. So let's recall what the political scene was like in Jesus' day. The Romans have invaded Israel. They're imposing oppressive taxes through the tax collectors, and that is not popular with many Jews, especially the opposed the Roman camp. At this point, the energy, excitement is building that Jesus is going to come through and really kick the Romans out. He's going to be the Messiah, which is the political expectation that he will defeat the Romans militarily, politically. And in this moment, when this energy and excitement, this hope is actually building, two disciples, James and John, approach Jesus with this request saying, "We want you to do whatever we ask of you when you come into your glory." Glory is really code for victory, for a political military victory of Jesus against the Romans. And what James and John want is, hey, when you come into your glory, give us the top posts. They're like the political campaign workers who are betting when their candidate wins, they get the top positions. Now notice that Jesus does not squash their hopes. He doesn't say you're wrong to hope for glory and to participate in glory. He wants hopeful disciples. But notice what he says. He says to James and John, you do not know what you're asking for. You do not know. That's the statement to some disciple who needs to grow in humility. And that's the invitation for us, to grow both our hope and our humility. Surveys can reveal a great deal about where we are politically. For instance, there's a New York Times poll where all you have to do is answer one question. And that question is, what's your zip code? And out of that, the survey can spit out with pretty high degree of accuracy, what is the likelihood of what your politics are, or at least the politics of most of your neighbors. Now that's about the politics of what, because that reveals what party that you're most likely affiliated with. If we're doing this big shift from the what to the how, we need a different kind of survey. We need a survey that measures something about the how. And remember, the big shift is taking us from ideology and party to spiritual values. So now we're going to ask you to take a survey on the spiritual values of hope and humility. When you complete the online survey, you'll get a sense of measurement of where you are on hope and humility. There will be one final button that reveals a political type that comes with that profile in this Jesus How framework. Don't click that final button quite yet. We'll prompt you for when to do that.
So, in the video there, hope and humility. So let's talk about, let's just unpack for a moment the idea of what they are talking about, as those are two spiritual values, the spiritual values of hope and the spiritual values of humility. And they reference this passage from I think it's Matthew, right, with James and John jockeying for was it Mark? Thank you, pastor's kid. For who will sit where. So what are these spiritual values of hope and humility?
Like the way you said, humility is a recognition of reality. It's complicated and therefore I think it's having grace and knowing that we don't know it all.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think when he talked about with James and John, you do not know what you're asking for. He's talking about and I think he followed it up by saying that it's just evidence that there's evidence there of disciples in need of growth, right? And humility is in that sense being in a position of I know there is more for me to know, right? And that ties us back into curiosity. And what about hope? About the spiritual value of hope? How did he unpack that?
We talk about hope is giving us, it's like, it gives us a goal. And if we don't have hope, I mean, there's nowhere to go, and hope is, trying to reach that. goal.
Good,
Using God to reach that goal.
good. And hope in what?
That's the hard part.
Yeah. And
To know what we hope for.
Um,
Or where do you place your hope? I mean, that's what we were talking about here, right? The what or the how? And you talked about that the last time we were together. And oftentimes we place our hope in the what. And as we were talking here, hope in the ideology, political party, and some worldly idea versus the how. And he contrasted the two criminals who were on the cross to the other side. That there is this idea of hope, if you're the Son of God, then rescue us, save us, right? Nothing wrong with that kind, as they were saying, nothing wrong with that kind of hope. And yet there was the how on with the other criminal. Remember us, right? In your actions, remember us when you come into your kingdom. And this idea of eternal versus the immediate, right? Versus the temporal, the eternal versus the temporal. So we're going to take a little survey. So we're going to need a little pen, and I can try to find you a pen if you don't have a pen. Marcelo and Carolyn, I emailed this out 2 weeks or a week ago, but also again this morning. And the questions for us in the survey are there. Everybody got a pen? Let's find out what this room has. This room does not have a pen. I gotta talk to Christian. Okay, so let's take a moment. And you've got two sets of questions there. You're gonna answer the hope questions and the humility questions. And then on the bottom of page 6, it's how we will score them together. But just before you get there, before you get there, just answer honestly, for yourself when how you go through this. Maybe answer how you're most likely to answer given the options.
Says an election year. But there's a difference between an election year and this election year. For my answers.
Yeah.
Which one?
The third
Which of the
question.
answers, which of the options fits best for you today?
Today.
It makes you look honest, right?
None of the above.
Oh, man. Oh, like the third one on humility questions. That's good.
Yeah, man.
All right, when you go to score, you're gonna count how many B's, how many C's, and how many D's. And in the chart on page 6, you'll count them, and then you'll follow the directions there. Ask a neighbor if you need help.
Yeah, what do you do about AIDS?
You do nothing. Zero.
No fountain.
Let me know when everyone at your table is done. Marcelo, Carolyn, y'all good? And John, Kathy, you got your numbers?
You're almost done. But if read it intrigued you, but that's the only one when I'm happy, why would I email the one I'm angry?
Oh. Poor me.
I'm done with more emails, I'll email it more often now.
I'm gonna play this one while you're still finishing up, so you can have it going in the background there. It's only a 3-minute video.
Okay, now is the time to click that button that reveals your political profile. When you do so, you'll get one of 4 profiles. One is the profile of the combatant. The combatant is the person who is actually low in humility because they think they're right and everybody else is wrong, or at least their opponent is wrong. But they're high in hope because they think they can win. That's why they're fighting. The next profile is the exact opposite of the combatant. It's the exhausted. The exhausted is actually high in humility. They don't think they have all the answers, but they're low in hope. They're ready to give up. Now, the third profile is the profile of the cynic, which is low in both. They're low in humility because they think they know better than everyone else, and they're also low in hope because they think what they know better than anybody else is that everything is hopeless, so they're standing back. And then the final profile, the one that we're aspiring towards, is the disciple of Jesus that is high in both humility and hope. You can think of the profiles as having different physical postures. The combatant has the fists up, ready to fight the opponent. The exhausted has slumped shoulders and maybe the head in the hands in weariness. The cynic is somebody who is going to fold their arms and lean back because they know better and they know it's hopeless. The disciple is the one who has hands open to receive and learn and is leaning forward into the world and into Jesus. As your guide through this course, let me encourage you. This survey is just a snapshot of where you are right now. The great thing about the hope and humility quadrant is that everyone can find their place on there and everyone has a pathway for growth. It's not fixed. It's not like you're stuck there forever. In fact, this quadrant gives you a pathway for growth. And the Bible is full of examples of people who have followed one of these pathways. For example, there's Elijah and Jonah, who I would say start out as combatants and then go through all of the quadrants. They go to exhausted, and then they finally go to disciple. And then there's Thomas, who is the classic example of somebody who starts out as cynic. And Jesus is inviting him to go on the path to being his disciple. Now that you know your political profile, we want to invite you to actually share that with others. In your small group, share with one another what came up for you, both in the results and especially how do you feel about those results.
All right, Coming back to it, so, I could have been more graceful. So let's talk about it, and we'll just stay together as a large group today. How did we feel about that? And where you landed? Did you resonate? Who wants to share what?
Some of these
Patty.
questions though, I can answer, because I'm in between, I'm in between two answers, so.
Sure.
I don't know.
So yeah, today's once again, not a diagnostic tool, right? It's a Polaroid picture, right? So shake it like it's a Polaroid picture, right? It's just what you look like in this hour, where, maybe you'd answer different tomorrow. Maybe you answer some of those differently in November. Maybe you would have answered them differently a month ago. It's just it's a Polaroid snapshot for today. And it is a forced choice, right? So, to land somewhere, you do have to answer something to land
I
somewhere.
actually changed some of my answers because I couldn't decide and I scored it. I was like, did I really mean that? And it actually swapped me between a couple of projects that I've read on a board there.
You mind sharing where
Cynic and exhausted,
cynic and exhausted?
yeah,
And do you resonate with some of that?
both, yeah.
So cynic and exhausted on the bottom level would be kind of low hope,
Love hope, yeah.
and varying humility, or around like a 5 on humility, or right in the middle there.
Yeah, it's potential thing.
Sure. Okay. Who else would want to share?
I landed
John.
in cynic, but I'm in reading this, the cynic is especially self-convinced about one particular truth. That's not really where I land. I'm not self-convinced, I am more uncertain about.
Yeah.
Because because I can see that the I can't find the truth, but I have so much stuff coming at me, I'm unable to sift through the trees to see the forest for its beauty, if
Yeah.
that helps.
I think the
And
cynic.
it's kind of, I'm at I don't know where to begin to find the answer to my questions, because people are shouting such evil stuff at me. I personally will shut down and go, I don't want to hear it.
Yes.
Stop.
And-
I want a reasonable conversation. I don't want to be shouted at because someone else thinks I'm wrong when all I'm trying to do is learn.
So that can, I think the idea of the cynic, right? It can be the sentence you read. My opinion is it can also be the opposite of the sentence you read. So the nonverbal posture still holds either way that you're talking about, right? Like, don't come at me with, unless you're willing to engage. So I'm gonna close off unless you're willing to engage in good faith and
Discourse,
civil discourse.
polite discourse.
So otherwise, I'm still gonna hold off, right? I'm not gonna go out and engage on, Facebook. I'm not, so my guess is probably your humility, right, on that, was that greater than probably between 5 and 7 on your scale there's where you probably weren't closer to the 0,
Right.
because you're willing to engage. So good. Who else wants to share? Kathy.
I filled this out at home and I filled it out differently than I did today.
Okay.
I'm not sure why, maybe I'm thinking about the situation. So I didn't score as well today. I scored high humility, but yeah, I scored some in cynic and exhausted. But when I read all that, I don't feel like I can relate to all of that. That I have a ways to go.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'll admit, and I've been where Joan has been, where trying to talk about it in a civil manner, and people tell me how wrong I was and tried to change me, and I had to just step away. So, I can respect other people's opinion. But I would love to be able to discuss it in a civil manner And I, from that video, I really remember that, that is so true to me, talking about how whatever someone believes, they really believe. We all believe what we believe is correct. And to me, that kind of helps you become more humble towards other people and empathetic and compassionate.
Okay, good. Marcelo, Carolyn, do y'all wanna, yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
So I did it virtually because I'm reading the book on
Yes,
the I did it and I was rated as exhausted was how I was. And when and I actually got a friend, I sent her the link and she's not a Christian. And I said, will you do this? Because she's very passionate about her politics and I want to see where she is. And she's a cynic. And but when I realized, she said a couple comments to me, and this may be why this is why I'm exhausted. Like, she's like, I'm willing to, in this political environment, to lose some relationships. And this is like a dear friend. And she said, and like normally I don't talk about who I vote for or whatever, but she said, if you're voting for this person or this person, I'm not sure about you.
Yeah.
And like, this is like the dearest friend, like, your political beliefs don't define me as your friend. For me, so that really hit me hard, like, and I think I'm exhausted from, like, just that it's a division, like.
yeah. Well, I think that what you're talking about really is, that there has developed this culture, as he was talking about with the New York Times, what's your zip code? They're living in a bubble. We've created such a massive culture over the last 2 decades, and some would argue for the last 4 decades, but specifically even more overtly the last 2 decades, of tribalism and standoffishness, and it's just a constant fire hydrant of being assaulted by the ways in which we're different, or I'm right, you're wrong sort of approaches. That I was watching a late night comedy the other night, and I was thinking back to myself, like, I don't remember 20 years ago what the jokes were like in the monologue. They're always political, right? So every late night comedian is always talking about, the political events of the day. And if you're someone who doesn't really care for politics, well, then there's no interest. It's just not funny because it's always, that's a steady hydrant of that kind of comedy. And, what was it like 20, 30 years ago where that wasn't the steady monologue of every night, or every Saturday Night Live didn't open talking about, politics every week. So, so I think it's that steady fire hydrant, Carolyn, that leads into that exhaustion, the cynicism. Did anybody score plus 15 or 15 over on anything? John, why don't you share?
So I came out combatant, and I don't really feel that. Because I feel like sometimes I'm a combatant, sometimes I've lost hope, and there happens to be a great article in the Statesman today in the background section. This woman who is running in the Bastrop area for a House seat in the state of Texas, and she talks about, or she's an independent, but she talks about, I can't solve all the abortion and guns and everything on the national level and all the combative stuff. She says, but here we worry about water, we worry about land. And so she talks about common ground. And that's the way I feel. Like, I can't solve Washington. I can't have no influence on that. But I try to work on local issues because that's what matters to me, what matters to me, and it's more, you find more common ground. But anyway, I don't feel like I'm combative, but sometimes I am, maybe to myself, and I'll bring it out to others. But I just feel like if we could find that common ground and talk about it, worry about is land and water and wastewater.
So I think, if you don't mind me responding, I think combatant's a weird name, right? I mean, and maybe we could have come up with a different name for the quadrant, but, and only because I know you, I'm gonna pick on you just a second. But, you know, the combatant is someone, or that quadrant is someone who's willing to go knock on doors and talk to people about political, candidates.
Yeah.
And you're a door knocker, right?
Yes.
And that, you know, that's not the combatant, right? That's the promoter, right? You know, I got something that I believe in, I believe strongly in, and I'm willing to go knock on doors to tell you about it and try to convince, right? A convincer, that might be another one for combatant. I feel certain on what I believe, and I'm trying to engage others for alignment in that as well.
I score combatant, and I think it's because I feel very frustrated when people don't read or don't understand, not know what a certain country is saying, what the conditions are, that government doesn't need power. And so it's the frustration that I have that people are not informed, educated in an educated manner. And so I think I try to fight them and say,
Yeah.
you know, you need to be more informed. It's like somebody told me the other day, oh, the government is killing people. What? The government is killing people. I said, no, I don't know. I don't think so. Where did you hear that? Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I think you're right. And I think that, you know, you landing in the quadrant and knowing you as I do
No.
is also not a surprise because you have such a high value on education.
Yeah.
And so that's not a surprise. We've engaged in a number of conversations.
Okay.
Where that's not something that's much of a surprise for me. Anybody land in the disciple box? All right, Diane.
I had 16 on the first one and 20 on the second. I think a lot of it is because I do try to, I've stepped away from the news to some extent. There was a time in my life I started every morning with Today Show. And, you know, there's certain days, once in a while I'll listen to it, just try to see what's going on, but there's certain times I'm finding, oh my gosh, I'm already upset, turn it off. And I think my biggest frustration is trying to find out what is the truth. Like I listen to the debates, I listen to everybody's side, because I've got friends, the gamut, from far left to far right. And for the most part, we all agreed our relationships are more important than politics, so we just don't talk about politics. So we know we feel differently about things. And so I really do try to find truth and fact check. And, you know, after the debate, you know, I really went out there and tried to search some things that people will, there's so much fear. And it's like, you know, you could be afraid to vote for either candidate based upon what some people are saying.
Sure.
How it's going to totally change and ruin America as we know it. So I've actually tried my best to go out and read and check different sources and see what is the truth. I'm frustrated because I don't think I can really find the truth. So I have turned to a lot of prayer. And you know, God, guide us, God, guide our country. You have a plan. Let the right person that's supposed to lead be the one elected. You know.
Well, thank you. Kitty texted me, she said she landed 1616. So just, you know, right in that box there. And I actually surprised myself that I landed in the disciple box. But in the hope, it was just barely up in there. So it was a 16. And that's a reality check for me of, oh, you know, I feel like I employed by hope. I preach hope. My whole life was centered around hope. I got room for growth. All right, so let's get to the next video.
That's the good thing to know is we all have room for growth.
Yes.
Is it wrong to wish I had a candidate to vote for instead of the last 3 elections I've always voted against?
Yes, you know,
That's,
sometimes I feel like, well, the lesser the evils, you know?
which is,
Let's hit this one.
Yeah, but I voted for it.
So, I hope that exercise was helpful and maybe perhaps you learned something about yourself. One of the things I've learned about myself is that I am dispositionally more combative. And this might come as a surprise to some people who follow fights on Twitter, but I did spend more than 20 years as a litigator. My life was in courtroom combat, which is thankfully a far cry from real combat, but my life was spent in the battle of ideas. And I was a participant and am a participant in the battle of ideas. A big focus of my life was and is trying to persuade people to a particular point of view and to a particular perspective. I am predisposed to the combatant mindset. And so I've had to work on that, on tempering the hard edges of that. There are other people who are much more predisposed to kindness, more predisposed to humility. And sometimes they actually have to work on pulling themselves out of that shell and actually engaging for the sake of justice. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes recognizing that a strength can lead to a weakness is a really important aspect of understanding our engagement, not just in the public square, but in life. When I think about my combativeness, my mind goes back to law school. There was a lot of contention on campus, booing, hissing, shouting down, cancel culture before anybody knew what cancel culture was. It was extremely contentious. And there were many times I jumped into that contention with both feet. Now, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with engaging in the contest of ideas. But the way that I did it, sometimes, especially in specific classes, I got carried away. There is absolutely no question, and I'm kind of haunted by a story a friend of mine told from several years ago, where he met with a classmate of ours, and he was talking about, keeping up with other folks and what they'd done, and he mentioned my name. And the first response at the mention of my name was that I was a jerk, except he used more colorful language. And when he told me that, I remembered where I spent most of my time around that classmate. It was in a particular class. And I can remember going all the way back to 1993, walking out of that class and sometimes asking God for forgiveness for the way that I'd behaved. But you know what I never did? I never asked anyone in the class for forgiveness for the way that I behaved. Their entire interaction with me was being extremely combative, extremely aggressive, and sometimes really angry. And I think about that often, and that tendency in me to engage in an extremely aggressive way has come up throughout my life. And one of the things that I've had to learn is, one, that's in me, and I need to understand that and deal with that. And number two, is I shouldn't just apologize and ask God for forgiveness. I need to ask the people that I have reacted against so strongly for forgiveness as well. So we'll learn more about the combatant in the next session, but I want to talk a bit more about humility. Humility at its basis is the recognition that we're inescapably flawed, and that sometimes, even in the areas where we feel most confident, we might be wrong. And so it's just this understanding that says, I could be wrong about any given issue, and also that I know I am wrong about some things. I just don't necessarily know what they are yet. Because hopefully if you already know you're wrong, you're correcting yourself. But to walk into the public square and to say, look, I'm offering this as my best understanding of the issue. This is my best argument based on the knowledge that I have. But also, I know I could be wrong. And in some sense, I know that I am wrong. I just hasn't been pointed out to me, or I haven't understood it yet. Recognizing complexity is a key to humility. There are many issues in the United States that are unbelievably complex. And if somebody is walking in and they're saying, A, B, C, and D is the answer to this unbelievably complex issue, you should be immediately on your guard. That's not to say that people shouldn't have convictions or ideas. Existential humility is not the same thing as moral relativism, and that we need to be really clear about that. The moment when I began to really much more fully understand that call on my life and how I had failed in that call really came in the aftermath of my Iraq deployment, where I had been so confident in my partisanship. I had been so confident in the rightness of my cause that, quite frankly, I had begun to lose the ability to see the other side. I had begun to lose the ability to understand their perspective. And it was that experience in Iraq, both the very personal experience of being bonded as brothers with people from every conceivable different background, political, religiously, etc., and also the experience of coming home and seeing how America was polarizing exactly at the time I had started to depolarize. I began to see things differently. And so I became much more interested in trying to learn where I'd been wrong than just single-mindedly convincing everybody that I was so right. And now, keep in mind, my job at that time is I'm a litigator, so my job is to convince a jury or convince a judge. My profession was cutting against my newfound instinct and inclination towards humility. And I'll be honest, I'm still reconciling those competing forces. So when I think of how do we manifest humility concretely, the verse that comes to mind is Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you, O man? What is good? It is to act justly. It is to love kindness, or love mercy in some translations, and to walk humbly before the Lord your God. And as a practical matter, ideally what I try to do is reverse the order in my interaction with individuals. I try to walk in humbly with kindness in the pursuit of justice. Now, any one of those three values is optional. But as a practical matter, when you enter into a conversation with somebody on the other side of an issue, I think it's very good to begin by listening. It's very good to begin by showing genuine affection for people, or a willingness to meet and to get to know people. So let me give you an example of learning from somebody who's very, very different from me. The person that I spent the most time with in Iraq, the person who actually reached out to me as a friend first when I arrived in Iraq, could not be more different from me on so many ways. I'm a white, evangelical, longtime conservative, at that time, partisan Republican. He is a Mexican-American agnostic, former Catholic, former Mormon, left-wing original supporter of Barack Obama, okay? So we're really different. We're really different. And I can honestly say, I don't think he persuaded me to change any of my political positions. I don't think I persuaded him to change his political positions. But I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot about the immigrant experience in the United States. I learned about what it was like for him to encounter gross racism in Wisconsin when he was growing up. I learned sort of the heart of why so many people looked at Barack Obama and saw a symbol of hope. I was in constant learning mode. Now, that didn't mean that I suddenly supported Barack Obama. It didn't mean that I was any less evangelical or anything like that. But I learned so much from him, and continue to learn from him and from relationships with people I disagree with. And politics for us was never the main thing. As important as it is, as much as justice matters, it was never the main thing. And so to this day, he's one of my most treasured friends, as different as we are. And even though he did not make me progressive, and he didn't win me over to agnosticism, not that he even really tried, it is still a precious friendship to me, and he is a person whom I respect and have learned from a great deal. This is a command to how to live the way God wants us to live, sometimes even in the face of hatred and adversity. There are people in this country, there are people in your community, there are people in your church who have exhibited kindness, who have walked humbly, and they have faced cruelty. And how they saw that and how they overcame that and continue to be kind and continue to be humble, I think is an incredibly important lesson for all of us.
All right, let's unpack that a little bit. Our need for humility, let's unpack that a little bit. What was some of the ways in which, or some of the things that we gleaned from what David was sharing in his video there about humility?
Begin by listening.
You don't have to give up your position necessarily. Be humble and listening to that person and not trying to change them, which is important.
Yeah. Well, why do you think with listening and the point that you were just making, John, about you don't have to give up your position, why would folks might be apprehensive about that? Why might they be apprehensive to engage in listening, or apprehensive about their holding their position?
Well, it's hard because you want to be combative, you want to try to change that person, and I feel like there's always the people that are going to have their position regardless of how you try to handle them, and it's also scary to talk to somebody that doesn't have the same position as you or feelings, and so.
Say more about it. You said it's scary. Why is it scary?
Well, because
What's that risk?
talking from my standpoint, you don't want to reveal yourself as not maybe understanding your position. I mean, I worry about that I can't really defend it that well because I'm not that knowledgeable on it. As knowledgeable as that person, they may have a better argument, and I just don't want to get in that argument. And you talk about knocking on doors, and right now I'm the precinct lead, and we don't send people into a combative situation. And I tell the people that because they're scared. They don't want to knock on the door that is the opposite side, that they'll get panicked and really get abused. So we try to limit and say we're just trying to get people out to vote.
Yeah. Jonathan and then Kathy.
Speaking from my inner cynic, there's been an effort over the last several decades to conflate politics and religion as pure identity. A lot of people are scared to have that conversation because they're scared that doubt seated in their political beliefs will start to seep into doubt in their faith.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Kathy.
I think it's because a lot of people don't want conflict. A lot of people don't like conflict, so they don't want to engage in that. I've evolved to where I don't need to share my political view, but I'm okay with sharing it. But I think I'm learning, and I'm learning more how to, I think it's important to listen, to get to know that other person. And I think I have, just from this class and from other things, that I'm, I've always been able to accept, but I don't like people telling me what I need to do or trying to change me. I think that has been the most difficult thing for me, but I'm learning that, it's okay because I can't control what they do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can only control what I do, so. But I do think a lot of it is conflict, people don't want to be in conflict.
I think the scary comes in, like John said, I know what I know and I feel how I feel, and I don't know that I want someone changing me because they have more information than I. For me personally, I can see the middle of the road on several issues. I can see both points, but I don't have the ammunition to convince the other side or both sides that there is a common ground.
So
It's the fear of losing it's the fear of losing respect from the other person. Because I have no standing to convince them that what they're, not everything is a wrong or right.
Yeah. So I think the idea, the fear and doubt and, I think this all stems from a place of insecurity. Right, and maybe I don't have as much to be able, in your terms, ammunition. But even all of that language, right, is the language of combatant, right? And also, all of that, the fear, the insecurity, I don't have enough to argue back to win, all of that strikes high or low in the humility, right? And that's what feeds into our insecurities and fears and this, that, and the other. And I think I've not heard this before, and it really has shifted me about when we look at Micah 6:8. And now I'm wishing that the writer had written it differently. What does the Lord require of you to do, right? To walk humbly with your God, to seek kindness, and to love kindness, and to seek justice. When we have it in the order which is presented, to seek justice, it almost subjugates kindness and humility to the penultimate seeking justice. And I think
biblical justice.
What's this?
But what is biblical justice?
I'm not gonna answer that. Unless you're willing to sit, listen, and engage. But the idea of the idea, the path to discipleship is rebalancing of, let me walk in with humility and extending kindness in the pursuit of justice, in the pursuit of relationships, reconciliation. What I heard from Kathy is boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with having good boundaries. Mental health, being with therapists has helped me realize I can choose. I have agency to choose what I can engage and what I want to engage and what I don't want to engage. And I have agency to say I disagree, and I don't have to win the argument. And I can still love the people, and I can listen to them, and I may still be uncertain. I may still have doubt. That's just more for me to investigate or to consider. I met with two short anecdotes. I met with someone who's in seminary who's pursuing ordination. And when you sit down with a seminary student, like I did with Kate Roberts many months ago, I sit down and say, tell me your story, tell me your faith journey. And and kind of the funny joke about pastors is during the process of preparation for ministry, we not only have to write out our faith narrative, but also our statement of faith. And that is something that we are answering for the remainder of our lives. Tell us your faith story and what is your faith statement? And are you able to articulate, defend, and what it is that you believe? And it is just many year intentional process of examining your faith journey and your faith statement. How did you come to believe the way you believe? What were the impacts of your life that are the events of your life that were formative, that had given you shape to how you believe what you believe? And the more that we do that work of understanding our own faith story, faith journey, and how it has shaped what it is that we believe. The more that we understand that process of coming to be aware of those, the more that we can have the ability to put that back outward. You know, I was not raised in the Southeast. I was, you know, Jonathan was. I don't know anything about Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and that culture other than what I've sought out to learn, but I wasn't raised in that. I wasn't raised in the Pacific Northwest, which is very different. I wasn't raised in Mexico or Canada. I was raised in the panhandle of Amarillo, Texas, right? You know, those were formative life events to me that have a shaping. I also was raised in a different family environment than how your family environment may be. Those are formative, and how it is that you come to understand who yourself is and shape how it is that you believe what you believe. You may have been raised in a traditional blue state and now you're living in a traditional red state. That's formative on world events, 9/11 and so on. These are all formative things. Waco was a formative, the Challenger explosion was a formative event in my life. These all have these all have ways that have shaped who you are. Understanding that more about yourself typically puts us in a posture to be able to extend that grace out to others. I was at an event last night, and it was the Pflugerville Pride Festival in Pflugerville. I didn't know till last week that Pflugerville had a downtown. Pflugerville has a downtown. She lives in Pflugerville, didn't know there was a downtown, and it was downtown Pflugerville. I didn't even know there was. And I was working a booth, and someone, you know, discovered that I was a pastor, and right out of the gate, the question was, what do you say when someone says that homosexuality is an abomination? Now, I'm in the middle of a festival, loads of people coming up and down, and this was the right out of the gate question, trying to target, right? Trying in that combative, you know, let me see if I'm gonna let you in based on how you answer this question. And, you know, my response was, you know, that's more of let's go have coffee type of thing. Here's my business card. But my choice was I don't have to engage. Because I respect the person and I respect the question, right, of what they're seeking, and I'm aware enough of what they're trying to do that I want to go and have coffee versus just shut it down, or to give the litmus test answer of here's the right thing to say, right? It's more complicated. And I want to do this in a way that is faithful and respects where we're coming from. These are all things that we have to work towards, and recognizing where are those things as we're moving in the direction of things that might be triggering for insecurities, for fear, relationship, or I'm just exhausted and I just don't have it in me to engage and to be pounded on by somebody else, you know, who I don't know that they're going to listen. Part of my boundaries with one of my family members is, you know, I just choose not to engage. I'm happy to sit and listen. And yeah, it may frustrate me. And I have a certain line that when you say something and I feel like you've crossed it, I will let you know. But I also know too that, you know, there's nothing I can say that is going to have an impact, so I can choose not to engage and still strive to sustain relationship. And I think that with David and his friend from the military, I think you saw some of that. Let me figure out a way that I can post up and invest in the relationship by listening, leading with humility, seeking loving kindness, and then seeking justice towards it. So we're not going to get to the last video here, which is the need for hope. Where we're going over the next several sessions is today we honed in a little bit on the disciple, and we'll take a little bit deeper dive in each of those quadrants as over the next 3 weeks. So the combative, the cynic, the exhausted, and how it is that both we begin to process how someone arrives in one of those quadrants and how we might extend kindness in those relationships, whether that's kindness to ourselves because that's where we are, or kindness to someone else who's in that quadrant because that's where they are and we love them. And so we're going to do a little bit deeper dive in each of those. And yeah, what are final thoughts? Yes, Diane.
Is there a place we can go and stream this video?
Yes,
Wanna see this?
I will do my very darndest to
Send that
include a
link.
link, yes, and it's the same portal that I'm using. You'll create your own account and you can go watch and do all the handouts and watch all the videos if you so choose. Yeah, Jonathan.
I wrote down 3 of my favorite quotes and we're going through this, but they're so relevant to how I think about this. And when he said, I know I'm wrong about some things, just might not know what they are yet. I love that approach. My version of that is, I don't want to be right, I want to get it right. So if you can convince me that I'm not right about something, I want to change that position because I want to get that thing right. It's less important for me to feel like I won the debate or anything like that. The other couple are with respect to nuance and complexity. Albert Einstein said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And that's a huge red flag for me when I'm talking about things. If someone says something about a very nuanced topic that's just flat out certain. The third quote that I thought of is, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. And so those are all like things that I try to incorporate into any discussion like this that I have with other people.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's very helpful. Yes, Diana.
One of the things that stood out in the last conversation that they had was that we can lose our perspective if we're overconfident in our beliefs. About that was.
Yes, absolutely. And I talk about this in my dissertation that the more and I maybe said this 2 weeks ago, the more polarized that we become, right, the more dehumanizing we become of the other. And absolutely, and losing that perspective. Absolutely, the more rigid and certain, and that's either side. I mean, that's out there, right? How do we work on, just like Christ was doing with the disciples with Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector, building a culture, a community where those relationships can thrive, they're meaningful, there's pathway to sustaining them and develop them, even with folks who are so radically different. And yeah, because the further out we get, and that happens if you just, attend go attend worship at a Christian church on either one of those. Sorry, Caroline, I'm trying to get in that screen there. On either one of those, on either one of those polarized sides, right? You attend worship over here, right? And so far over here that, yeah, these people are the enemy. You attend worship over here, that's so far over here that, and they're so right that these people are the enemy. And man, that just does not feel like the path to Christ to me. That does not seem the idea of walk humbly with God and to love mercy and to seek kindness, seek justice. Yeah, Natalie.
I heard something just recently that sort of resonated with me as far as why this seems so different, which is that the different sides are adding the component of disgust. And that is a really powerful component of disgust. So not only are you the enemy, but whatever it is about you that I disagree with is disgusting. And
Repulsive.
Repulsive.
Yeah.
And that's just adding an additional layer of,
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
I don't want to engage with someone and have their response to be not only you're wrong and I think you're evil, but you disgust me.
Yeah, that's dehumanizing.
It's dehumanizing.
It sure is.
And
It
it's
sure is.
definitely so relevant in this current
That's
political
what-
environment.
Yeah, that was kind of the point.
I think,
It's so frustrating.
the see if there's any more. So I think that the disgust, I think I had this alliterative expression in my sermon, the lake of lies. Bathing in the lake of lies, which is social media, or it could just be the news and not being able to distinguish this is an opinionated columnist versus the news. Those are two different things. And those are on all three of the major news networks, right? There are opinionated columnists and commentators, and then there are people who are reporting the news. And I think, you know, the idea of disgust, dehumanization, you know, if you would have asked me, and my response to that would have been the dismantling of community, right? So, you know, the more that we could spend time together, the more spiritual muscles we exercise on a regular basis of engaging in relationship with others, the more that we pull out of community and into isolation, whether it's internet or just in our house and not engaging the neighbors, the more those spiritual muscles of relationship atrophy, and how more difficult it is to engage and to extend humility and extend that kindness to others. You know what? The neighbor put that sign up in the yard, shut them down. But we've atrophied in some of those discipleship muscles of being able to extend and love, to the fear of not being able to knock on the door because, you know, who the hell's knocking on a door these days? You know, someone rang the doorbell and you're like,
Well, everybody has.
what was that
The
noise?
security code.
You know,
Security camera.
and because that's that dismantling of community, right? And that I think leads to the suspicion of everyone.
Yes.
You know, I have no idea. Wendy and I, we were talking to Phoenix about going to the mall. How as a teenager, you know, we were mall rats, and you know, you just hung out at the mall, a center of community where you gathered and engaged, right? And Wendy had said to Phoenix, yeah, people would just drop you off at the mall at age 14 and pick you up 4 hours later. And then she said, but we wouldn't do that today. And I just thought, well, why wouldn't we do that today? It was a whole hell of a lot more unsafe, you know, 30 years ago than today. But I'm a whole lot more worried and suspicious and scared about him being alone in the mall for 4 hours than I am today.
When we got dropped off, we were meeting our friends, so we
This
were
is true.
in a group.
Yeah,
Whereas
we're-
you're thinking about you're just dropping.
Oh,
your
no, it's
child,
true.
but
Well,
yeah.
because none of his friends are gonna go to the mall, you know?
Exactly.
But that's why you wanted to go to the mall. Because your friends are gonna-
Yeah, your friends were there.
Community,
Yeah, it was community.
community.
And it was considered safe to, you know, you were within the mall.
Yeah.
You didn't expect someone to come with a gun and kill you. You didn't expect someone was going to abduct you, you know, all the things that could happen nowadays.
You went there to shop, really.
Oh. I went there to steal, so. But that's a whole nother Sunday sermon.
Some coffee. Sounds like coffee.
Sean is going to write me an email now.
No.
All right, so who will lead us in our closing prayer?
Well,
Thanks, Natalie.
let's pray. Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed by what we have done and left undone. We have not fully loved you or our neighbors. Forgive us through Jesus Christ, that we may follow your will and glorify your name. Lord, we grieve the divisions among us and pray for healing, restored relationships, and the courage to pursue unity. Remind us, we are invited to your eternal feast and called to invite others, near and far. Strengthen us through Christ to be lights of unity in a broken world.
Amen. All right, let's go in peace, everybody. We'll see y'all next week.
So there was no plus one.
No class last week.
Oh, sorry.
Right. Bye, Carolyn.
This, one is,